Hey everybody, I'm Kelly Price and you're chilling with the Unfit Christian.
What's up, y'all? It's your girl Danielle from UnfitChristian.com, the voice of millennial faith and the shot of Henny in your communion cup. Now, if you're just joining me for the first time, welcome. If not, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you follow me on all social media at Unfit Christian. And this lovely shirt is brought to you by shotofhenny.com, the official shop of Unfit Christian. If you love this content, help your girl pay her light bill this month. So let's talk, y'all. Let's talk about this whole Be His Peace thing that is happening across social media right now. Now, in its defense, most of these have been jokey jokes, and of course your girl has laughed. I know y'all have laughed too. But Be His Peace is actually some relationship advice that many of us, particularly women of color, have received in terms of learning how to navigate our relationships, intimate partner relationships with the men in our lives. So the idea behind it is that because the world is so harsh and cruel to Black men, that when they come home, can you please go rule raggedy truck? Jesus Christ. How many times you keep running back and forth? Basically, it says because the world is so harsh and hard for men of color, particularly Black men, that when they come home, you as their intimate partner should be the peace that they cannot find in the world. So you shouldn't do things that cause conflict. You shouldn't challenge him. You should do things that make him feel like a whole and complete man because he lives and functions in a world that does not. And of course, with all the fatherless homes and unnamed traumas, nobody has it harder navigating white supremacy than Black men. The reality is that we all have trauma and things that we need to unpack and heal from. But somewhere between being expected to be coats and being expected to be peacemakers, women are still required to do the bulk of emotional labor for people who refuse to do their own work. So we often talk about this concept of emotional labor, and I think we should really put a concrete definition around it. So emotional labor is the work that we provide in order to induce or suppress feelings in order to bring about the desired effect in the situation which requires it. So this could be your work situation, it could be your situation with your family members, friends, and particularly we find it happening in our intimate partner relationships. Now, this by all means is not exclusive to heteronormative relationships. I'm sure this happens in all dynamics where there is an expectation of labor that perhaps is unfair. And in reality, we all do some form of emotional labor in our relationships. And at some point, someone's going to be doing more labor than the other person. Some forms of low-level emotional labor look like you being the person who remembers all of the important dates, such as birthdays, anniversaries, work situations, whatever the important event is. If you're the person who always remembers it and is the person who does all the work that's required for the specific occasion, then that's a low-level form of emotional labor. And most of us in our right mind are not going to complain about doing low-level emotional labor. The problem comes in when we have situations that create emotional dissonance and emotional exhaustion from the level of labor that has been required of us to sustain the relationship. But perhaps the greatest source of emotional dissonance and exhaustion is when you are the partner who has to process your feelings, his feelings, and do the labor for the subsequent emotional needs that are going unmet. Unfortunately, most of us have been set up to fail by the way that we have been socialized to experience and expect relationships. Have you ever noticed the advice that we get about relationships? We need to be better communicators, and we need to speak what's on our mind as women, but we're also expected to be mind readers for men and to read beyond the superficial things that they tell us. Or we're told to accept what they tell us, but what they mean, what they say is not what they really mean. And so you have to do all these interpretations, which requires a high level of emotional intelligence and labor on your part. And this tends to be especially true for Black relationships where there is a male partner. Because Black men haven't been encouraged to be vulnerable and to show their truest self, they shut down their emotional self very early, stunting their emotional intelligence and emotional maturity. However, it presents itself as a problem in many relationships until they learn to unpack that baggage. Unfortunately, women tend to end up doing the work for them to walk them through unpacking that baggage. And we do so gleefully usually, because going back to that idea that we must be his peace in a world that hates him, we as Black women tend to have an innate defense of Black men because we are so deeply understanding of their plight. So we socialize ourselves and other women and generations behind us to be his peace. Now, where the hell does all this come from? If your guess was white supremacy, you win a prize. Black feminist scholar Dr. Patricia Hill Collins states that in American society, sexual violence has been an important mechanism for oppressing African Americans, women, poor people, and LGBTQIA folks. In the Jim Crow South, for example, rape and lynching worked hand in hand as gender-specific sexual violence, wherein men were lynched and women were raped. Okay, I know. Now you're asking me, how the hell does all this bubble up to the expectations of Black women in relationship with Black men? Dr. Hill Collins goes on to say that lynching and rape also represents the type of binary thinking when it came to racial and gender segregation. With racial and gender segregation, it mandates that either race or gender be made primary. They cannot both coexist in a primary spot. So within this logic, race and gender become two separate oppressions rather than one intersecting oppression that brings about its own conundrum of problems for those who sit at its intersections. By viewing them as two separate oppressions, they could not be equally important. And since Black men were getting lynched, they carried the burden of race, which was primary. And for Black women who were being raped, that carried the burden of gender, which was unfortunately became secondary to race. So as targets of lynching, which was race-based, and ritualized murder, lynching and rape have not been given equal weight. And as a result, issues that seemingly only affect Black men have been given precedence to issues that seemingly only affect Black women. So with our Black gender ideology prioritizing race over gender, we have a community of men who tend to lack empathy for the problems of Black women because in their mind, they carry the heavier burden of race. And it's no secret that we tend to prioritize race over gender. R. Kelly still has a career, doesn't he? So it stands to reason that our Black gender ideology, this idea that race takes primary over gender, has spread to even how we conduct our intimate partner relationship. By using this logic, our gender, our womanhood, carries a lighter load than our Blackness. And for Black men who are so burdened down by the weight of race, their need for survival takes more precedence over their need for emotional maturity and development. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the church's role in our Black gender ideology and how we perceive ourselves as a race over gender. Even if you consider yourself non-religious, a lot of how we socialize ourselves or have been socialized by others is rooted in the teachings of the Black church. We went from learning to be Proverbs 31 women to learn to be coats and peacemakers in order to grow up men who refuse to do their own emotional labor. To quote writer Jelima Jones, the idea that women should suffer through pain, heartache, and frustration in order to birth the vision and emotional maturity and intelligence of the men that they partner with runs completely contrary to the teachings that we have been indoctrinated with for the last decade. Jelima goes on to describe the experience of many Black church women in saying that we were groomed to abstain from sex, compromising behaviors, to dress modestly, and to pray for the arrival of our Boaz.
I am waiting for you. I've been waiting for you. I am waiting. Here I am, I'm waiting for you.
Men were never presented to us as projects to be nurtured, matured, and grown into fully functioning, emotionally capable human beings. In fact, with Proverbs 31, we were taught that good husbands were ones that were respected by the city gate. That's Bible, that's book. We went from expecting husbands to act as the covering and the head of the household to being expected to be coats and peacemakers so that he can mend all of his unhealed trauma and then eventually become the man who is leading and the head of the household. So I got to birth, nurture, screw, be faithful to a man who can't even show up as a complete self. And then I'm supposed to turn around and submit to something that I mothered into maturity? And let's not forget the work of women's ministry in harnessing these attitudes. When's the last time you've been to a women's conference, prayer breakfast, singles conference, small group, whatever? The focus generally tends to be around becoming a wife, being a good wife, sustaining a marriage, being a mother, becoming a mother. It's all about nurturing and serving in a subservient capacity to the men that we date, partner, and marry. But if you spent any amount of time in church, you know as well as I do that there is very little equivalent development of men to be better husbands, be better providers, be better partners, and to be emotionally ready for the wives that they claim that they deserve. We have churched and socialized men to avoid rather than embrace the nuanced complexities of emotional vulnerability. And now we're expecting women to do all of that work and be his peace. The only way to fix this problem is to create and embody a culture of personal accountability for each individual who comes to the relationship. A culture of accountability looks like we are admitting that there is no perfect formula, there is no magic key that fits any and everybody's needs to sustain a healthy and happy relationship. Part of our culture of accountability also means admitting that we have failed men from the womb by not requiring them to explore their emotional self and to be vulnerable and to encourage them to love and embrace their truest self. And that has fed into what we now call toxic masculinity. We've never had these expectations or requirements of men to have emotional maturity. And now we desire partners who do possess those things, but the minute that he shows any kind of emotion that you deem as too fragile, you're now calling the man gay or any other kind of insult that revolves around his sexuality. At some point, we have to make a decision and be accountable for how we contribute to our own oppression. We can't complain about the expectations of emotional labor if we also are unwilling to shift the responsibility of labor by teaching men from boyhood how to be more in touch and more full with their emotional selves. And finally, our culture of accountability must require that we change the way we socialize our daughters, our sisters, our friends, our cousins, our nieces, all the women in our lives. We've got to stop socializing this belief that to be a good woman means to tolerate any and everything as long as he doesn't beat on you and he doesn't cheat on you. I've said that before and I mean it. At the end of the day, we have to require more. And that's not just more of men, but it's more of ourselves. We have to dig deep and have those hard conversations of the ways in which we have participated in the vicious cycle of being the sole or majority emotional laborers in our intimate partner relationships. So if you want to talk about being somebody's peace, let's be real. Should you really be at peace if you are not doing any of the labor to sustain the relationship? Hell no. Fuck your peace. You should not be at peace with somebody else doing all of the work, all of the heavy lifting to keep things happy and peaceful in your relationship. And to be honest with you, sis, if being his peace is costing your peace, that's a price that's much too high. I don't know what y'all think. How do we have better conversations about this? How do we approach real expectations and division of labor for emotional work in our relationships? If you like this content, help your girl keep the internet on. Go to shotofhenny.com. You can purchase this lovely shirt there as well as several others. I'm D. Danielle Thomas of unfitchristian.com. Let's do faith differently.